So how can the United States effectively handle all these problems now surfacing in the world? Here with some perspective is Kurt Volker. He's a former U.S. ambassador to NATO. We heard Ban Ki-moon say this is an era of unprecedented troubles. And when you look at the landscape, you've got Ukraine, Iraq, Syria, ISIS, Ebola. You know, you're out there on the world stage. It's always tough out there, but this does seem like a really tough period, doesn't it?
It is. And I think there are a couple things going on. I think one factor we have to take into account is that the United States over the past several years has been trying to retreat from the world a little bit, to try to not be so engaged as militarily as we were under the Bush administration, as aggressively trying to solve all the world's problems as we were in the past. But the fact that the United States is pulling back that way leaves kind of a vacuum that the worst forces then rush forward to fill.
We heard from one of the people that Nathan spoke to saying that the UN cannot drive the process forward. And it seems like you could put almost anything in front of that. It does seem like it's kind of this body that doesn't really seem to get a lot of stuff done, doesn't it?
Well, I think it's great to talk about the UN because I think you have to think of it in two categories. There's the UN Security Council, United States, Russia, UK, France, China. They're not going to agree on just about anything. And so getting the UN Security Council to take action on peace and security in the world is going to be almost impossible. On the other hand, you have the UN organizations, the World Health Organization, International Labor Organization, and they do great work. They organize the world, they set standards, they help receive national contributions, and they help deliver assistance. And something like Ebola, I think the UN can play a very important role. But you take Ukraine, with Russia having a veto, while at the same time it's invading its neighbor, the UN's never going to be effective there.
Well, we've seen in recent years, it seems like Syria percolates up, nothing seems to get done. Is it an ineffectual body when it comes to the real kind of meat and potato stuff?
I think so. I actually think so. And I hate to say that because the United States was the principal supporter of the United Nations in the late 40s and early 50s when this organization got set up. The idea was that you would bring the victors of World War II, all the countries that had power remaining, together in order to try to make sure that no global security challenges ever emerged again. But the reality is we became very divided with the Soviet Union and now Russia on one side, China out there on its own, the US, UK, and France kind of working together, but no consensus. And so the UN at that level is kind of powerless. And as a result, there's no effective global organization for security. And the only effective ones are regional, like you have NATO in Europe.
Is it time for an overhaul? Is it possible for an overhaul?
Listen, it is very important that the UN be more representative of the geography of its members. You have countries like India, Brazil, South Africa, have no voice in the Security Council. So that's a huge gap, and you do want to see that filled. But the ability to agree on changes, again, gets hung up on these differences between Russia, the United States, China, and others as to who belongs in and who doesn't. And even a country like Brazil, Argentina is going to say no. South Africa, Nigeria is going to say no. India, Pakistan's going to say no. So we have a very hard time reforming what we already have, but we know what we have doesn't work.
As a diplomat, a guy who's gotten together with all these people and trying to push buttons or maybe get off in the corner and talk, what do you look at when this occurs in New York? What are some of the telltale signs? I want to see it through your eyes. What do you look at?
Very simple. If you go back to the UN Charter and you read what it says, it talks about values. It talks about democracy. It talks about human rights, human dignity, rule of law, security. These are core values that all people in the world, doesn't matter where they're from, they all believe in these things, they all want these things. And then the question that we have is the United Nations itself living up to its own values? And if it's not, how do we point that out and hold the UN to its own standards? That's the way I think we should think about it.
And you would say no?
Today, no.
What about climate? They're talking a lot about climate this week. Is that something that, I mean, you would think everybody's in favor of that.
You know, let's be clear about climate. So climate is a choice. Economic development under the current technology produces greenhouse gas emissions. The United States went through this, Europe went through this, China's going through this now. In order to lift people out of poverty, to produce an economy, you're going to create greenhouse gases. those greenhouse gases may raise the global climate, raise the global temperature. So now you're facing a choice. Well, do you want to limit growth or do you want to limit emissions? And the answer to this is that you've got to develop new technologies that don't create the emissions while you grow the economy. That's what we're all struggling with. No one has a magic answer to this. But that's where we need to go if we're really going to solve it. Because when you boil it down to a choice between growth and emissions, countries that need to lift people out of poverty will choose growth.
All right, Kurt Volker, always a delight having you on the set. Thanks so much.